In this episode, we take a look at the longest episode I've ever created. What we took as a presentation and cut it into pieces. We did soldering. We covered painting wheel sides. We look back at the old DC panel. We take a look at ESU programming. We take a look at tools. Well, not those tools. We're talking about actual tools that fix things, as well as the curmudgeon's gripe of the week. Only in this episode of Sue the Milwaukee Road. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm William Sampson. Today we're going to be growing with our railroads. And you say,
well, what is that supposed to mean? Is it for beginners or advanced modelers?
I would say it's a combination of both. The exchange of ideas is what's most important, but we're going to start looking at kind of bench work as well as electrical, and then even the details that come with model railroading. This is more a look at a lot of different techniques, tools, and things I've learned over the years to be able to learn more about the hobby and get better as I've gotten older. I've grown with it. Now, my dad, we started a railroad back
1980?
Brain fart.
That's when I was born, and he had already been in model railroading. So I've been exposed to it my entire life. There's an advantage to that because I see a lot of different things. When you're a young kid, the bench work is up, so you really get a good look at all the wiring, the servos, and everything that goes into the bench work itself. So let's start there. The bench work.
Where do you start?
First, just start. You have to have something. You just need, I know guys that have done stuff on old blank doors. They've done old model railroads that have gotten torn down. They've used a section of it. So you want to just at least start with something. The key is just to have a flat surface. You don't need to get into the mountains and having all the plaster and all the other stuff that's going along with it, because that's where you grow and you get better with it. So I would say for materials, I use Homosote. And Homosote is a nice construction material. It's a sound deadening board that's used, commonly found at Menards. But there are other big box stores, I think, that will carry it out there. But it's a softer material. And that just allows you for easier nailing, spiking, gluing if you desire to do that. But I put that on top of a piece of plywood, so it's kind of a sandwich. And then the base is actually a frame made out of 1x2s. And to give you a look at kind of what I'm referring to, here's a cross section of what I'm building with. So here's the Homosote. This is the plywood, and then this is the benchwork, 1x2. Very simple construction. I actually build this in such a way that I'm creating modules that as my railroad is built, I can take these and I can slide it in and add on to it and add on to it. And then when it comes to taking it out, I can just back out the screws that are holding the sections together, and I can take it out. So I try to leave my joints in areas that are somewhat accessible and close near the edge. That would be a connecting track, but I don't put the joint right on another joint, a seam, just for expansion and contraction purposes. This stuff does expand and contract a little bit in the Midwest. We do have climate shift, obviously, with it getting hotter and colder between summer and winter. You can use a dehumidifier to help regulate your railroad room to try to prevent against that. It happens with the pink foam too. I know there are guys out there that use the pink foam. They swear by it. I've used it a little bit on modules. Haven't been totally sold on it, but I haven't used it to build an entire railroad. And the reason why, again, I grew up with it. I grew up with the Homosote plywood with a framework technique. My dad did an open, kind of a skeleton bench work that he had risers that were installed to vary your heights and your grades. So that's the style that he ended up using and developing. I'm currently, at least in the portion that I'm working on right now, just building it as a shelf railroad. Staying on the perimeter, nothing over 24 inches in terms of the depth of the layout. And then the length, it just varies by the room that I'm in. Currently I'm in a 10x12 room. The overall construction of this railroad has been just as I have shown. So I ended up getting materials, and anybody that's out there, you've got to start somewhere. I say 4x8 sheet of plywood. A lot of guys cringe at it. They're like,
oh, don't start with a 4x8.
I guess if people like running in circles, there's a certain level of repetitive nature that is had there. But it's much like you think about as a kid growing up, train around the Christmas tree. What excites the kid? Every time that train goes by, there's a sort of fascination that's had there. The power supply they used was just straight DC. It was very simple. So is a 4x8 sheet of plywood with just a DC power pack and a DC locomotive. It's easy, it's fairly inexpensive. I would suggest if you want to get beyond just the 4x8 sheet mentality, rip that thing in half and go with a 16 by 2 foot. If you've got the space to do that, just go whatever length of the room and go point to point. That is very much what I've done in the space I'm working with currently for my Hiawatha Elevated District. I base it in 1985, but that's just a time frame I'm working within, and it allows me to be able to create something that is in a small enough space and the area is reusable. I mean, this here behind me, this is a Murphy bed. I have the ability to be able to just pull this down, and I'm not going to pull it all the way down, but to give you an idea, Murphy bed. Very simple. Now it's a guest room. And now it's back to a model railroad. So you have flexibility in your spaces. Think a little bit outside the box when you're starting your railroad itself, but if you've gotten yourself to that point, be creative with the solutions. I know in my dad's case, again, he started in 1980, but he tore it down, rebuilt in 1992. It was in 1994, we had Gary Friesman out and a few other Twin Cities modelers. They gave us a few suggestions. One of the biggest ones that we took was making it point to point. My dad's railroad was a folded dog bone. We ended up chopping the railroad up, adding a helix, putting in a second deck, and in fact, our electrician Colin, he had his home off of Como Avenue in St. Paul. He had a yard in there and he was going to be moving, so he took that out and we put it into a Suburban and drove it to St. Michael. So from St. Paul out to St. Michael, our Wilmer yard was in St. Paul, already built, wired, everything was already done on it, and we integrated it into the railroad. And again,
Thinking outside the box.
we ended up, my bedroom, it's a shift or a split level home, so my bedroom was up a half a floor. And we ended up popping through the upper level of the basement into the knee level high, which is the staging. So we put west staging in there. Thinking a little bit more outside the box, that has allowed us to be able to expand the operations. There are 10 tracks out on the west side, and then out of the east, we've got 3 tracks, as well as a few other options of developing trains that are in Union Yard. But I digress, and
We're not talking about that. We're looking at the bench work.
thinking outside the box and being able to come up with creative ways to be able to set up your system. And when you look at track, I alluded briefly there about DC. I think DC is a great place to start. We started in DC. So that Railroad 92 built. Colin was our electrician. He's a master electrician, so he was able to really dive into this thing. It was a 5-cab system. We had a lot of great technology at the time. I mean, he had things that were blocked, and we had fail-safe. So if you went about to blow a switch, you wouldn't go through the switch. And all right, mind-blowing to begin with. But DC can be even simpler just by having the 2 wires in that round piece of track. That's where you got to start, and you're going to add on to it. You're going to grow. What we found is eventually getting my dad to DCC. My wife and I eventually bought him a DCC system for Christmas. That kicked things off. We hooked it into the system. We took a DC railroad into DCC. Little hiccups every now and again, but we, for the most part, made a fairly seamless transition in doing so. It is, I think, a revolutionary element in the hobby, and most modelers that have been in it for some time would agree that DCC has changed the hobby. Now, is that where you start? I would say no. I would say start with the DC, learn it, basics, and then advance to the DCC. Because on top of that, costs do come into a factor. If you look at the cost of DCC, you're going to spend a few hundred on the command station, you're going to spend a few hundred on decoders, you're going to spend more money on locomotives and trying to get this stuff up to speed. And you're going to get frustrated with a lot of the stuff that is inundated with things not working and things shorting and why isn't this and why isn't that. Start with simple, build up, and learn from there. That's what I did. I learned incandescent lighting to LEDs with DC to be able to then use resistors and try to refine that type of system. There's a lot to be learned there. So I look at that DCC versus DC and think, DC, it is a little bit easier. It's for where guys can start out. We all have to start somewhere. Think Christmas tree. Train around the Christmas tree is just that simple start. But then you look at it and you say, assembly and reassembly. Where do I start? As I mentioned, my model railroad, I'm building this in a modular setup, so that ability to be able to expand and contract, if you will, not just physically the materials, but if I say I want to tear that piece out, I can. I basically unhook a couple tracks, pull out a couple screws, and then I can pop that section out, maybe work on it on a workbench, refine it, and then reinstall it or revisit it altogether. This particular setup is made in such a way that the Hiawatha Elevated District didn't have a big curve in the halfway point. It was one straight shot. So if I move into a place that I've got a longer run of about 22 feet, because I know I'm 12 foot by 10 foot, I can take out that corner section and I have it designed in such a way that it'll just be able to go straight. So I could reuse those two pieces. That's thinking ahead a little bit more beyond maybe what most modelers are doing. You might want to just focus on, if you're just starting out, keep it basic. If you're advanced and you're like,
oh, well, I've already done all this work. I don't want to tear it out now and then restart.
An example, just this last weekend, we had an area on the railroad that the staging is very hard to access. There was a turnout that was causing issues. When the locomotives would go through, it would stall. We needed to address it. How do you get in there? Well, right above those particular turnouts, we were able to cut out an access point, and it only took us, well, built in 92 and doing it today, 20 plus years to be able to go through this process and cut that out. And actually, it's almost 30 years now. But the point is that you're able to go back in there, revisit what you've done. Don't assume that because you've done it, it's cemented in, it's permanent. None of this is permanent. Yes, will it take time to redo? Absolutely. My dad even admitted, he says,
Well, Bill's going to dive into this, but that's definitely something I wouldn't.
And, well, I am. I'm willing to dive into it because I've got the time vested, and I know that when we run operations, I don't want that short happening. I also want to know that our servos are throwing completely and consistently, and it's tough to be able to install something up underneath that only has that much clearance. A design flaw, yes, but something we're able to work with, absolutely. And the last thing that we can look at as far as the bench work is concerned is just having the wherewithal to be willing to change as you go. And that means if it's DC, you can go to DCC. If there's a problem on it, you can go in and fix it. And if it really comes down to it and you don't like it, tear it all out and start anew. I know guys that have started and done multiple railroads. I mean, granted, my dad's only on his second in the home that he's at, but he could very well at any point reset and start over.
Don't think that's happening.
But he could do it. We're going to move forward and take a look at a little bit more of the DCC world, as well as a little bit of DC, but mostly DCC.
Did you know in 1930 General Motors purchased Electromotive Company and Winton Engine Company, and in 1941 expanded EMC's realm to locomotive engine manufacturing as Electromotive Division, what we know as EMD today? What year did the GP60s visit the Twin Cities? Was it A, 1970, B, 1982, C, 1986, or D, 1989? Do you think you know the answer? Stick around, we'll find out in just a bit.
All right, looking at the electrical and the digital side of things. I mentioned DC being a nice way to be able to kind of learn the system. I think that's still true, and why do I say that? We soldered a lot of joints on the GN in 1970 because that eliminated a lot of that expansion and contraction. We left expansion joints every once in a while, but again, remember it was a DC railroad. I learned to solder leads. I learned to solder rail joints. I ended up learning to solder even locomotives to be able to put lighting into it. So as a skill, you want to be able to refine those skills, get better at them. Are they going to be perfect out of the gates? Nope. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have issues. You're going to have solder globs that you can see from space.
Houston? Yeah, we can see the solder blob.
That's going to be a factor. You end up refining and figuring out that I'm going to pass this on to you is the hotter the better, the easier the solder flows. I use flux. I end up finding out that there's
It was Coster.
It's Kester.
a liquid flux that it just lays down even nicer. I was using a paste, and the paste
Yeah, wasn't working as well.
heat sinks. To be able to take, I just take a couple pieces of metal, large pieces of steel, and set them on each side of the joint that I'm going to be soldering. And then I can go in there with the heat, and the heat's going to dissipate up into those large pieces of metal, but it won't right by the rail because the rail's obviously exposed, and that's where you're applying the heat. So learning that technique, letting the solder flow, that goes a long way. Setting up leads. I end up soldering a lot of leads to the bottom of the rail joiners, and that ends up just being a way to hide the wire. Is that the absolute best way to do it? Not necessarily. I have also soldered to the side of the rail, just thin enough and an area that I have access to that I can reheat it up and move it. It's not an absolute art or a science right down to the soldering side of things, but that is just refine it, get better with it. I do use track gauges to make sure that my track is a certain distance apart, and I think that is important, but we'll cover that in just a moment. The wiring connections underneath and the methods that you use. I like the ability that I have that this thing is accessible. I'm able to go underneath. I've already installed the servo. I can drill now. I haven't put the wire leads in, but I can put the wire leads in that will drop down. The connectors that I use end up being terminal buses. I've liked the terminal buses because that's what Colin had used on the GN in 1970 on my dad's railroad, so it's what I'm familiar with. But as technology has evolved, I've had guys that have pointed out they use the suitcase connectors or the quick clips. They just snap them onto the bus wire with their lead that goes to the rail, and they're all done. There's no soldering involved. So there are some technology advancements that it might not have been there 20, 30 years ago, or the styles that had been aren't nice as refined as they are today, as well as in some cases somewhat inexpensive. So they're easily accessible. I like the terminal buses just because I can add another power lead to that just by sliding my clip on after I've crimped it to the wire. I run it up to the track that I need and
Boom, I've got power.
so there is that. And keeping in mind turnouts being a big part of your model railroad. Do you get the ones? I get DCC ready or DCC friendly. And that means that the frog has been insulated and they're carrying the power across for me. So there's no interruption. I don't have to be insulating any of the rails anywhere around it. I could use just the regular rail joiners everywhere. Now, just general practice, I generally insulate the two inside rails on the point of a switch, so what meets the frog. I end up insulating those just because I've done it for most of the time that I've done DCC. So it's not to say that it has to. It's technology advancing, and that's kind of a nice thing about the turnouts have been the connection methods. It's the connections underneath to the turnouts being DCC friendly. As I mentioned, the gauges and tools. Now this is an area that I think is extremely beneficial. I've used so many different gauges over the years that, I mean, I guess I compile a collection of stuff that sometimes you wonder, like, geez, I mean, what is this thing even for? And you have to remember exactly what you used it for. But sometimes it is that gauge that sets your track spacing. It could be the coupler height gauge that KD creates. There are tools, pliers that you can help crimp your hoses on your couplers. There's just little things like that. But when I say kind of weird things like,
What the heck is this thing, or what does it do?
take the Nmra standards gauge. Having standards goes a long way. And I think the Nmra has done a great thing by having the Nmra standards gauge because I use it all the time. It shows you the spacing on the track itself. It shows you in between. It shows you tunnel height. It shows you coupler. There's a little opening that the coupler goes into, and if it goes right into that pocket, you've got the coupler at a good height. When you look at a lot of this stuff, you have no idea what all these little elements are on that particular tool, but this at least gives you an idea of what each element is and what it does. So having those type of templates on hand, they help refine the actual function of the railroad. There is one that just checks the wheels themselves, the spacing of the wheels. I received a wheel, it was on an Athearn car, and it had broken free from the axle.
There's something kind of...
And it was slid in, halfway on the axle. It was not to gauge at all. But using the Nmra gauge, I could gauge that wheel out just right, and we're up and running. You don't realize sometimes, obviously the mass manufacturing that happens with a lot of these type of cars, they're putting them together, and they're doing pretty darn good to have them engaged to begin with. So if one of them gets a little out of gauge, you can bring it back. But those are tools that I like using. I think they're beneficial. They're not an absolute because, like I said, over the years I've acquired these things. I picked up just little things every now and again. One of them was a reamer for a truck where you can ream out the actual journal for the point to have a truck roll better. That was more utilized in the older Athearn or roundhouse cars that they weren't all as nice as they are now. But it's still if you change metal wheels, a lot of times those point widths or lengths are a little different. And if they're a little bit longer, you might have to ream out the journal of a truck to be able to get maybe an intermountain wheel to work on an Athearn car. I've had a lot of success with most intermountain wheels going on to most manufacturers, so that hasn't been a real problem. But if it is, that Micromark reaming tool has been nice. Again, acquiring a lot of these tools over time. Not everybody's going to have everything right out of the gate, and you're not going to run out and want to purchase all this stuff at once. And the last thing I cover on is kind of the programming.
I think DCC can get really complicated really fast.
So if you're that guy that's starting out and you're like,
I need to get the best system. I need to get the locomotive. I need to get the JMRI. I need to get the laptop. I need to get the programmer. I gotta get.
Just breathe.
a little bit at a time, small steps.
Baby steps? It means setting small, reasonable goals for yourself, one day at a time. One tiny step at a time.
Baby steps.
Learning JMRI. I think that is a great program. Anybody that hasn't learned it, start diving in. It can be mind-boggling and frustrating. Like, who wants to sit here?
CV, what does what? And
I'm blown away. There are modelers out there, and I know one of you guys that,
we won't name names,
but I'm going to help work on JMRI with him because he still will program individual CVs, and I'm blown away. But we'll definitely get there. And some of you other fellow modelers that are out there that are hesitant and diving into some of that stuff, it's a matter of doing. Take simple notes. We write down post-it notes a lot of times with very little different nuances between manufacturers of what we need to adjust, what you need to note, what is the CV, what is the consist, some of those type of things.
JMRI makes it easier.
It's not more complicating. It only is as complicating as you want to make it. And when I say that because you can go into a locomotive and you want to do all this stuff. Let's start with just changing the address. Good. Put it on the railroad, you're good. Maybe it's changing the bell. Got it. We changed the bell. It's no longer a steam bell. Now it's an electric bell. Whatever it might be, those refinements can be had in time. I've been working in JMRI, and I think one of the most mind-bending elements in JMRI is signaling. Some guys think,
Well, signals are cool,
Don't get me wrong, I like them.
but
There's always a but.
I literally will end up with a headache at the end of the night just trying to churn through a lot of the stuff when you're setting up an interlock and trying to get it to work, trying to get the aspects to show the way you want them in all circumstances that the railroad would have prototypically had. So that does get complicating, but that's a challenge I've grown to. It's taken 40 some years to be able to get to that level, but I kind of enjoy it, oddly enough. Same with the decoder installs. You ever open up a locomotive and say,
I'm going to put in a decoder. This shouldn't take me too long. I watch them on the old YouTube, and they do it in about 20 minutes.
unless they time lapse them like I do, they do them in about 1 minute. But you're looking at something that happens fast.
And it takes a long time.
I had an SDL39. I put 19 LEDs in it. That took a lot of time. That was a lot of wires. It's very fine wires, but that goes back to refining your soldering skills. You're not going to want to jump into that being your first project. And I think there are a lot of guys out there that you do want to jump into the coolest thing right away.
But it's not for everybody.
Another thing to note, I use ESU's Loc Programmer. It works great for ESU products. ESU doesn't work so great with JMRI. We've had issues with JMRI not loading the version 5, and there's been some quirks and issues that I'd rather not have dealt with, but that's kind of part of the hobby again, growing with it. I learn along the way. I use the Loc Programmer generally just for all the Loc and ESU locomotives.
Yes, it's an additional cost.
But that goes to it again. DCC,
It's going to cost a little bit more.
It ends up costing a lot more, actually.
but when it comes down to it, it makes it just that much more fun. I always look at a lot of this stuff as, think of it as, if it's a video game, if you're a younger guy, you're in some of those beginner levels. You're learning as you go. The games are designed in such a way to add difficulty as you progress because you get better. This is the same way. This is your game. This is a 3D board game that you're able to interact with, and how do you want to add some of those nuances and different levels of difficulty? And you do that simply by getting better at the stuff that you've got, bringing people along with you, and the better you get, the more entertaining it's going to be. So when it comes to DC versus DCC, yeah, I do say start in DC and then eventually evolve to DCC. But if you do start in DCC,
Get ready for some headaches.
but realize that they're not permanent. You will resolve them and you will solve them because
All of us have kind of been there.
everybody's at a different level as you're moving along. So,
You evolve and learn as you go.
and one of the things that we're going to look at a little bit further in a little bit more detail is actually the details, because we don't all get there right away.
Well, unless you buy the manufacturers, because theirs are pretty nice. They're done.
All right, it's time to answer that quiz question. I sure hope Greg Dahl's phone wasn't ringing off the hook because he doesn't like to get up. He's enjoying his beverage. What year did the GP60s visit the Twin Cities? The answer was C, 1986. Greg shot this photo down at the Milwaukee Road turntable in the Suit Line era.
All right, diving into the details, we're going to look at just some of the simple upgrades that are out there. One of the first things that I would probably say that a modeler that's starting out, and even guys that have been in the hobby for a long time, one thing you can do is just paint your wheel sides. The wheel sides themselves, if you ever see the bright silver wheel side on a model railroad, you know it's a railroad. You know it's a model railroad. You don't ever see the prototype rolling along with those big shiny silver wheels. The least you could do as far as technique, I actually learned this one recently from Greg Dahl, a fellow modeler here in the Twin Cities, is just use a felt, he uses a fabric marker, and it just uses a marker essentially, spins it and it paints the wheel side. You had a dark brown that works well in that application. I had used Floquill's rail tie brown that you can lay it down, same type of thing. It's an oil-based paint, so it's not probably ideal as far as the scent. The fabric one is a lot cleaner. And then lastly, I used to just use acrylic paint. I would just use a flat black paint, and I would roll it, or I'd use rail tie brown paint and lay it down and wait for it to dry. And then I'd use chalks to be able to adjust and kind of give it that more of a gritty look to it, like the prototype. For the side frames, I use a spray-on flat camouflage paint. It's a rattle can paint. I end up just taking a couple of plastic wheels, putting it into the truck frame, and then spraying it that way. So I don't get paint down into the journals, and I don't know how big of a deal that is. Some guys say that it's an issue, some don't. So that's one thing to kind of address. Paint your wheel sides. It makes it pretty simple. Another thing that goes right with that, let's say you finish a freight car, it looks fantastic, it's weathered nice, you got the trucks all done up nice, and you set that thing down in your railroad and you get the low angle
Because your cell phone can get a lot lower.
and you get this beautiful shot and you shoot it across your railroad, and the rail sides are this bright nickel silver. Paint the rail sides. It's fairly straightforward. Same type of techniques that I mentioned. You could use that fabric pen. You could also use a paint pen, or just use the spray on. If you're doing the spray, obviously cover your floors, cover your walls, cover everything. I wear a ventilator whenever I'm spraying any of the type of paints or materials. Just once it's airborne, nobody needs it in their lungs. So do that. It gets a flat finish. Make sure you clear your rails off right away, as well as protect your switch points, and you don't just go hog wild and just start spraying everything everywhere, and then you're like, my railroad doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you got to take the proper precautions. So tread lightly. Just think about some of those things to give your railroad a little better presence and visual eye candy. So those are a couple of tips that I'd say you can always kind of dive into right away. I did mention the journals of the trucks, and where you can spin those micro mark things to clean them out. So if you did get paint in there, you could always use that tool because it's a versatile tool. Weathering locomotives and freight cars. I think this is one thing that most of us model railroaders, you want to weather your equipment. You want to be able to make it look like the prototype. Either you're afraid to, or you overdo it, or you mess it up and you think, oh,
I can't go back.
if you use chalks, there's a little bit of forgiveness there. If you don't put any dull coat on it to begin with and you weather the car with the chalk, you can obviously wipe it all off, or wipe it off fairly well. I model the Sioux line, so white is a little less forgiving, but I find that some of that subtlety and then wiping it all off gives it a little bit of that grit. Underdoing it is better than overdoing it. We're so used to seeing so many cars of today being neglected to the point that they're just rust buckets and they look terrible. But if you're modeling the 80s or even the 90s,
they're not that bad.
I look at videos. Bob Rivard posts a lot of prototype videos that really kind of show you the evolution of freight cars. He's got shots from the 70s, got some stuff in the 80s, a little bit in the 90s, and you look at all the shots. He was shooting full consists or trains in length, and you get to sit there and look at it and go, not that dirty, not that beat up. Oh, there's one that's a little rough, but not that bad. So your whole train doesn't need to look like that it's been through, tough times. Now, modern day cars, some of them have been around a long time. I just recently saw a BN hopper that was 1974. Thought, that's kind of cool. BN 74, big BN logo. Jeff would probably enjoy that, BN. But when we're looking at some of the elements that are out there on the weathering side of things, scale it back. Less is more. I use Doc O'Brien's weathering chalks. I use a Tester's flat finish. They have a clear coat that goes on nice. The reason I like it, because it's really dead flat. Now, I did purchase some Rust-Oleum. It's called Dead Flat Dull Coat, and it's not as flat as that Tester's. I'm being a little bit picky in regards to the actual paint application. Does it work? Yes. There's also one that's a fixative by Krylon, and it's another clear coat that you can spray on. Does it work? Yes. I saw NS Modeler 24. He's a Norfolk Southern modeler that sprayed it all over a brass locomotive, and I thought, oh, this kid does nice work, and if he's spraying that stuff all over a brass locomotive, I'm going to give it a shot. So I did. It's got a little bit of a sheen to it. It's not dead flat like I like, but that would be good for a clear coat on a car that you weather that's maybe 2 or 3 years old. It's still got a little sheen, but it's still flat. That's also nice to use on some of your 187 scale vehicles. You can either tape off the windows or take them apart and then just spray the car so it's not that gloss shiny. The specular highlights that you're going to see on a car of 1/87th scale, in real life, those highlights would be huge. So knocking down some of that sheen is a detail that you can help kind of pull things back. Now, one thing I know people are really intimidated by, and that's actually weathering locomotives. It's one of the things that I've always kind of steered clear of a little bit, but as I've gotten better and better in modeling, as I say, grow with the modeling, the actual locomotive, a lot easier to dull coat. I take it apart completely.
I take it off the chassis, I take the locomotive, I take the motor out, I take the trucks out, I pull side frames off. I mean, I blow the things apart.
And you say, well, geez, that seems like it's a little bit much to weather it.
I think you get a better effect. I can tape off the bolsters and I can go through and dull coat it and weather it and then reassemble everything. And I think aesthetically it gives it a better look than trying to do it when it's all assembled. I paint the wheel sides and then I can make sure that I'm not getting the contacts of the wheels where the electrical pickups are. So there's just little things that I've learned over time that end up giving me a better product. But locomotives, as intimidating as they are, I suggest you can even just use, if you don't want to take them apart, block off the windows with the blue painter's tape. If you're taking the shell off, block off the windows with the blue painter's tape and block it off underneath so that dull coat doesn't accidentally spray up underneath and get on the inside of the window. Little details like that can go a long way. Sometimes just flat finishing stuff makes it look better. I know my dad goes through a lot of times and he's flat finishing almost every car that goes out on the railroad. It seems like a tedious process, but that also means that one, the paint is going to cure, the clear coat will cure enough that when he goes to weather it, it's ready to go. You don't have to wait for it to dry. Sometimes we accelerate the process too much. We kind of hurry through it. I'm guilty of it 100%, is that I'll lay down stuff and then I'll lay down another, chalk and then I spray it again. I'm doing it all in such a short period of time that
Actual taking your time goes a long way.
But when we look forward on other things with the cars, a detail that I find really interesting is actually the couplers. And people think,
Oh gosh, a coupler conversation?
we're going to go down that road. And yeah, we are. Horn hooks versus plastic versus KD. KD all the way. I know people a lot of times are sitting there like, KDs. Well, I don't use KD number 5s. I use scale KDs. And my dad uses number 5s exclusively, or for the most part. He's got a few of those scale cars. Cars that came with them, he left the scale couplers on it. But he likes the coupler face. The amount of face when your track work is not even, number 5s are more forgiving. Those couplers can move up and down. One thing I do like about the number 5, at least that series, is that they make downshift couplers. If your coupler is sitting low, they make an upshift coupler. They make longer shank, shorter shank, so you can adjust the coupler's, basically position in a lot of different ways simply by buying a different coupler that KD makes. It makes them more universal. Among your railroad, you can switch them out between one another. Another mind-blowing detail that they added to theirs was the Whisker Coupler. You no longer needed that copper flat spring that KDs used to use. Now, I know a lot of people say, they're like,
Well, most cars come with couplers already on them.
Walthers, their wannabe KD coupler, it's this big, huge monster of a thing.
That's a huge coupler.
It's not, it's compatible. Yes, it functions and it works. But having consistency does go a long way. This is something that we've learned with over time. We've had issues with a coupler here or there, and it's kind of like you pop it off and you find out, well, that's an Atlas coupler. Well, that was a Walthers coupler. Well, that was another knockoff coupler. Staying consistent, it seems like it's a very petty little thing to be doing. I did it to most of my rolling stock as I purchased it over the years. So I just slowly kind of was making that effort. But they do sell bulk packs if you want to dive into that. The same goes with metal trucks. I end up adding metal wheels on everything I have. For the most part, most of the stuff I purchase now has metal wheels. But there is occasionally a car that might have plastic wheels that needs the Intermountain metal wheels. I like the Intermountain ones. I think they're the best metal wheel replacement out there. But there are other manufacturers, and each person that likes what they like. But that's what we like to use. So I think couplers are a huge part of it. The coupler height gauge, as I mentioned before, that is nice to be able to determine exactly, having standards that are set in such a way that we are guaranteed that that coupler height is right. It's going to match up with all the other cars. The more refined you get with stuff like that, the better your operations as well as railroad's going to function. I know, it seems like I'm covering a lot of just,
Oh yeah, same old, got it, yeah.
but we're all at different paces of this. There are guys out there that have heard none of this stuff that I've mentioned just previously. And there are some guys that
We know it all.
So that's about all I need to say about couplers. I think there's a lot to be said for having the coupler height gauge as well as maintaining a standard as far as your couplers are concerned. Now moving forward, the buildings. I think buildings have their place too. There's a lot of details that can be had within the building. It's going to the prototype is my suggestion here. People say, well, it's kits versus scratch built. Buildings, I'd say scratch build all the way. You can use some kits and kind of maybe kit bash, but the actual structures themselves, I'm doing a grain elevator industry, so most of those grain elevators are just Schedule 40 PVC that I've ripped in half, but you get wider diameters, you can get skinnier diameters, and those at least allow you the ability to have the look of a lot of prototypical grain elevators, because not all grain elevators are made the same. They've got a little difference to them, so they're not all the Walthers, same old, same old. That's one thing I would suggest trying to avoid. I think the details that can be found within a building and people can look at and go, oh, I know where that is. That's the Hiawatha Elevator District. And if you can at least set the scene, at least to that point, you're bringing that one step further in terms of trying to achieve the reality you're trying to create. But the last thing that I want to cover is actually the community itself. I want to thank Ken for putting together a program like this. This is a great opportunity for us to be able to share information with one another. Ken has put together the Twin Cities Modelers Retreat for I don't know how long. He actually just a couple of years ago had said,
Why don't you come down? Just check it out. And at first I thought, well, I suppose I got to try to find a time of the weekend. And, just excuses.
Finally went down there, had the opportunity to meet a number of different fellow modelers. And lo and behold, I've actually made a lot of good friends over the last few years. And that's thanks to an event like the Modelers Retreat. Now, this is, part of the Nmra world. And the Nmra world, people a lot of times are like,
Eesh, stay away from that scary little group of people.
some of those master model railroaders are
Odd ducks, you know what I'm saying?
And the reason why I say that is because
There are a lot of odd ducks.
and when it really comes down to it, I've got to know a lot of the master model railroaders are out there, and man, they know a lot. That's a great way to share information. They're trying to share as much of the information as they can that's out there. I know there's a Twin Cities Model Railroader NMRA podcast. And anybody that goes on to either go on your iPhone or go into whatever your podcast provider is and just type in the
Twin Cities division. You can even do it in Google and you'll pop up and see the episodes that are available. They're definitely worth listening to, so check them out.
Speaking of podcasts, one of my favorite ones is AML. It's A Modeler's Life. And Lionel Strang used to work for Model Railroader. He's gone off on this tangent to create this kind of a monster in itself. And that's a lot of just interviews with a lot of different manufacturers and fellow modelers and just talking about life in a lot of cases. It can be kind of funny. It's a little change of pace. I a lot of times listen to it when I'm working on the railroad. So it's a great avenue. I know one of the things I like most about that particular podcast is that they interview the manufacturers. Jason Schron from Rapido has been on there a number of times. And man, that guy, he's entertaining to begin with, but he also covers a lot of the content that we don't hear from manufacturers. A lot of times he talks about
how many locomotives have to be made to have a lot, and then justification, and then the difficulties of tooling, and why can't you go HO right to end, and
all these complications that might be involved with the actual manufacturing, what it takes to actually create model railroad rolling stock and locomotives. So there's something to be said for that. And I think those spaces within the communities that we're able to bebop around and kind of get information here and get information there, and you get them at flea markets and you get them at operating sessions and you get them through avenues like this. I've been putting together a YouTube channel for the last, 2-3 years. It's called Sue the Milwaukee Road. And I put that content out just to share the information. Here's what we're doing. Here's the technique I'm using. This is the project I'm working on this week. Merely sharing the information. Some cases it encourages fellow modelers. I know some guys have, they've done the Great Northern Scale car that I've done. And they says, well, I want to get the decals and I want to do one of those. So they do. And that's what makes it fun. It's about the sharing of information. If I can share information with you, I get information from a lot of you as well. So a big thanks to those guys that I mentioned earlier. I can't thank anybody enough that provides the information to us younger modelers, and hopefully in turn I'm able to pass this information down to the future modelers. You don't have to be born into the hobby to be able to learn with the hobby. You can eventually learn it just as you kind of go along. We're learning as we go. I know you're learning as you go, but thankfully we've got platforms like this, as well as content and information that we can share with one another on so many different avenues, whether it's these videos, whether it's the podcasts, whether it's the flea markets that we attend. Either way, a huge thanks to Ken Ziska for putting this thing together. the fellow MMR guys that are out there that are sharing the information with these younger guys. If you're considering becoming an MMR type guy, join the NMRA and check out what they've got going on. I know it seems like kind of a cool little challenge just to do the credits and all that stuff in itself, so it might be worth it. A huge thanks to the community, and I will continue rambling if I don't wrap this up. So thank you guys for tuning in. Be sure to hop onto YouTube and check out Sue the Milwaukee Road, or if you want to see more of my dad's railroad, you can go onto the GN in 1970. Type them into Google, type them into YouTube, you'll find us eventually. That's all we've got for now. A big thanks to all of you, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care.
Alright, here's a curmudgeon coming at you for the gripe of the week. The gripe of the week this week is about those MMRs, the Master Model Railroaders, those people out there in their special little clubs, and they're all like, oh yes, we're very high society. Well, I tell you right now, I've met some of these Master Model Railroaders, and I tell you, they're just these guys, and someone says, hey, did you meet that guy? He's an MMR. And I says, oh, that guy over there, that's just Tom. He's a real good modeler. I didn't know he was one of those people. And they say, yeah, he's in one of them clubs, and he's just a very special guy. Well, when it really comes down to it, unless you get to know them, I guess you really don't know what they're like. But as far as I'm concerned, they're all just a bunch of highbrow, stuffy little guys. And that's a curmudgeon's gripe of the week. And they're all like, oh yes, we're very high society.
A big thanks to everybody that watches to the end, that has hit like, hit subscribe, as well as made comments in the past. It's those actions that help share this content, so if you haven't checked out other episodes, feel free to do so. You can also check out the tour of the GN in 1970, as well as the past episodes of the GN in 1970.
70s.
And they're all like, oh yes, we're very high society.